Tonight's speaker is going to be Maria Earnest, and Gordon Schaufelberg is going to be helping you.
Yes, he has a special
the
part.
history and stories of the Chuctanunda Cemetery, which is over in Minaville.
Opening. I am Maria Earnest. I come from Rochester, New York. My ancestors were principally the Schuyler's and the Earnests in Minaville. They were both the Schuyler's and Earnest were first early residents. The Schuyler's came up from New Jersey about 1778 and settled in the what was Tryon County at that time. The reason for my costume is that I wanted to represent the era of the 19th century. And this is a common garment, short gown, petticoat, under petticoat, chemise, boots, that a woman would wear. And I made this, sewed it by hand, following historic patterns. Sewing is fun for me. Okay. So if anybody is interested in the costume making, there is a book on the table. So I am an Earnest from Minaville, Montgomery County, but I am also a little bit of a little from Duanesburg. And I have the history. Here's my credentials. Authentic. The genealogy and brief history of Robert Thomas Alexander, Mary Elizabeth Little as it relates to Maria Earnest and siblings. And I will put this on the table. Anybody who wants to take a look at it, along with the genealogy of the Little family. And I will have this on the table for. I have put together a who, what, when, why, and who synopsis of my talk. And I might even have to read from it because it's, old brains don't hold too much. But it's, so I have, I think, 26 copies. It's free for you to take home. I would like to have it passed out, whoever would benefit most from it. I want to do that now. They're for sale for $20. That's what it costs for me to have it published. All the funds will go to the Chuctanunda Cemetery for buying bags of cement or for foundations, rebar, water. Let's see what else, Gordon. Stop.
Lawnmower.
Little stuff. This is at $20. It's not going to go very far for lawnmower. Okay. On the board here, we have a map of the original layout of the Chuctanunda Cemetery. I really need to go backward. I need to reverse. The reason this cemetery exists, it's because in the from 1840 to about 1890, there was a movement called the Rural Cemetery Movement. And there's, in your handout, it explains more about it. It began in England, and it was developed for a couple of reasons. The church cemeteries were overfull, and also the odor of decaying bodies, because they weren't buried that deeply back then. was very offensive. So it was decided by smart people to find rural area and develop cemeteries. In addition to that, it was a period of an interest in architecture and horticulture. So these cemeteries were made into what we would consider beautiful parks with paths and ponds and gorgeous monuments. Let the article speak for itself. So the movement migrated to the United States. The first one was Mount Auburn in Boston. Then it moved westward into Albany, where is the Albany Cemetery, and then westward more to not Amsterdam, Green Hill, but then it filtered down 3 miles to Mineville. And somebody must have been a really good promoter of this particular style of cemetery. So plans were started in probably around 1840, maybe a little bit later, for the Chuctanunda Cemetery in Mineville, which is 3 miles south of Amsterdam, on Route 30. And as you drive south on Route 30, the beautiful cemetery covers a knoll, and because there's fewer trees now, you can really see the stones. It's almost like some of them are being restored, and they're really bright white. So what they did, I'm not following my script at all, but what was developed was islands, grassy islands with paths, carriage paths around it. It was strictly carriage paths, very narrow. And then from that, 20 by 20 foot lots were designed, cut out, and the original area is here in the Gordon, help me with the southeast.
I have a hard time hearing you, though.
That's all right. That's all right. Southeast. Yes, I have to remember. Talk at the person.
Thank you.
But you're not the only one here. So, anyhow, so the old part is here. And when they started selling lots, very few were bought at first. Then after the Civil War, it really burgeoned. Before the cemetery was even established, there were people buried in the southeast corner. And they were Native Americans. They chose it. It wasn't, it was their sacred area. And also people who weren't buried in a church cemetery, or didn't have a family, or were travelers and died en route. So they were buried up here. I've been working on this for a year. I accepted this program after Reverend Sheldon Jackson's program, and Chuctanunda Cemetery was mentioned, and I had to say, yay, Chuctanunda Cemetery. and I opened the door during a year-long process. So I must say, it's been in this head and on paper, on my fingers, for a year. You can imagine, it's like writing a book. So tonight's the culmination. I am glad. But I'm happy doing this. So, back to this. So 3 acres of farmland were donated for the cemetery from the farm of Jacob Johnson, whose farm lay just north in the 1840s. More acres were added by the purchase of farmland from the Schaufelberg family, whose dairy farm was adjacent. The Chuctanunda Cemetery originally was called Mineville Cemetery, and it was created during the rural cemetery movement of the 1840s to 1890s. As one enters the cemetery, there was a wrought iron sign labeled Chuctanunda Cemetery installed at the stone pillars, which resemble Scottish cairns, which is piles of stones. The drive-in was lined with trees to give the impression of entering an estate, because this is what estates would look like, grand estates would like. The carriage drive-in. Those trees were removed some years ago. They were old, breaking apart, a lot of work to keep them up. So I have attached in my this handy thing, publication, the history of the movement, so that you can get more knowledge about its development and why it was chosen. Well, the meaning of Chuctanunda is a Mohawk Indian word meaning stony, and we know how stony Chuctanunda Creek is. There are 2 streams so named. Chuctanunda stream coming from the north, from the Adirondack Mountains, and the other one flowing northward, coming from Schenectady County. It's an illusion, but they seem to be twin streams, and they're right across the Mohawk River from one another, but they're separate sources of water. Which is interesting. Schoharie Creek runs northward, but it's as was explained to us, it's because of the geography. Water runs from high to low, so we're going into a valley. And the South Chuctanunda Creek runs along the border of the cemetery. So I imagine that's why they chose that name to replace Mineville Cemetery. The region was primarily settled after the Revolutionary War. Settlers from New Jersey and Pennsylvania established farms, and then the town of Mineville grew from there. The charter for the cemetery, even though people had bought plots and lots, because that whole thing is a plot. Individual is lots. So the charter was signed in 1861, and my ancestors were involved in this. Schuyler's were involved in the charter. The purchase of lots and family plots began slowly. The first deed was that of Jacob Johnson in 1862 of 568 square feet, who paid $1 for his because he donated those first 3 acres. That's the story. 7 more seven more deeds were sold that year. 1863, 2 more. 1864, 4 were sold. So you can see it's really a very slow start. And then the Civil War. There aren't many Civil War vets buried in the cemetery, but that's when this cemetery really took off. Most gravestones are created from marble, granite, and a few in zinc. A fad for a while, but more durable than marble. Most gravestones are modest, a few are unique, some are huge and ornate. And I have photographs of all those that I mentioned, so it's for you to look at afterward. There are cenotaphs, which is a memorial without any burial to a family. Spires, obelisks, one that resembles an above-ground box. Probably people are buried underneath it. It's a great resting place for note-taking. And let's see. And there's 2 mausoleums, the Marcellus and the McCann. And they are ones they're really worth seeing. They're like these stone burial caves. And both of these men were prominent businessmen in Amsterdam. Let's see. Some families are heavily represented in the cemetery. The Schuylers, by far, Staley, and Young. The original families were Scots-Irish, German, and Dutch. And you'll see the name Katie in many of the names, either first name, middle name, or last name. Very, very prominent. A research topic. Don't know yet. The reasons are complex and worthy of your own research. As the region grew, one sees names reflective of the immigrants from Eastern Europe who were fleeing war and famine in their homelands. The cemetery, and this is what's one of the cool things about cemeteries, it's a social history. And besides it being an interest in architecture or trends of the time, it's a social history of the area. And so we started with the Scots-Irish predominant, the Dutch, and German, lots of German. That's Eastern United States German. So that's why what I find so fascinating about cemeteries is get a picture of the whole area. And we have Italian represented, Polish, Lithuanian, Slovak, as these folks immigrated and moved to New York State and set up farms, that their families are buried in there. So I'd like to read. I am indebted to the federal census of 1870, which provides a snapshot of occupations of the residents of the town of Florida in which the cemetery resides, and which are represented in the cemetery. Outstanding Among those are those engaged in farming. Others include tradesmen, clergy, and very important, you wouldn't know it anymore, but breeders of prize-winning Percheron horses and Holstein dairy cows. But Holsteins still remain the preferred dairy cow, and there's still lots of dairy farms around, and one of the early long-standing ones was Chuctanunda Farms, Monsieur Schaufelberg, or Herr Schaufelberg, is Swiss. Then, let's see, we'd heard the story about Sheldon Jackson, but there's two other people, prominent people, I would like to bring to your attention. And they really are, well, one is more worthy of delving into his history, and that is Walter Elwood, who was an educator, a traveler, and a collector whose vast collection of items gathered from around the world are displayed in the museum in Amsterdam bearing his name. Do visit. It's fascinating. Then General Elias Brown. And, he's interesting, but he was a recruiter for soldiers for the Civil War, and he worked from his and J. Cady's general store, Brown's General Store, eventually, in Mineville. His unit was the 13th Brigade New York Volunteers. He was also postmaster, town clerk, and justice of the peace. His fine home is located along the same side where the store was, and is lived in today. But the store is gone. The store was emptied years ago. The contents were bought by Deerfield correction, who will help me with that? Deerfield in Greenfield.
Henry Ford bought the contents.
Yes. Greenfield Village, yes. And there was a replica of the store with its contents, but the store itself, the building itself, no longer, it was destroyed.
It was moved to Eastfield Village.
The building was?
Yeah, it was
Truly?
Don Carpentier bought it, or did some work for the lady in exchange for the building, and moved it. He also moved the church from Bringan's Corners up there to that location as well.
Ah, well, great, because that wasn't anything that
Yeah, they numbered all the timbers and all that.
So it's
reassembled it.
Exactly. Wonderful. So why I kind of play down the brigadier part is because he was a recruiter for volunteers. He never saw any battle, but he got that designation. There is one. So one more thing I want to, in closing, before I take questions. 163 years and still an active cemetery with a dedicated all-volunteer roster of people, including acting superintendent of the cemetery, president of the board, board of directors, secretary-treasurer, and a fine degree volunteer investing their time and expertise in protecting and preserving this historic rural cemetery, of which there are only 40 in the United States. And one of the few created during the rural cemetery movement. So, present with great honors my friend, Gordon Schaufelberg, for whom I do a lot of volunteer work, and whether he likes it or not, I find things for him to do, and I put marking flags, and he, like that, lickety-split, he goes right to it. But sometimes they get mowed over, so I have to replace them and write a note. Gordon he has been assigned the task of talking about the Schaufelberg family's involvement. 102 years they've been involved with the cemetery. And he gave me the history, but I don't feel qualified. So, here.
Thank you, Maria. But as president, I want to acknowledge Maria. She's a recently installed board member, and talk about enthusiasm and energy and devotion to a cause. She set the bar so high as a board member, I don't think anybody else has ever gone to top it. She's tremendous. So, with that said, thanks for having us here tonight, folks. Yes, my involvement with the cemetery began in, 1968, when I was fresh out of high school. And my uncle, I worked on the family farm for my father and Uncle Earl. And Uncle Earl was on the board of the cemetery board, superintendent of the grounds, and he came to me one day and said, "Hey, we need a grave digger. And you want the job? Well, how much? What's the pay? $40 a grave." I said, "Well, yeah, I'll do it." It was in the fall of the year, November. So I did one grave that year. Got a taste of it. I said, this isn't too bad. What I hadn't reckoned on was, come spring, there's a backlog of people. So the first spring grave I did, I was up there one morning, got down about 4 feet, water starts coming in on me. I start bailing water, and I was beginning to wonder what I got myself into. Boy, this $40, that was over 2/3 of my weekly take-home pay working on the farm, but boy, this is pure misery. But anyway, along came our superintendent of the grounds, and well, he was in charge of burials and lot sales too. Mr. Bill Lang. And he saw me going at it, and he came over with a smile on his face and basically said, "Attaboy, good work." A Galdang backhoe's no place, or a Galdang backhoe's got no place in the cemetery. Okay, well, I guess I got a permanent job here though, if that's the case. But as he pulled away, I thought, the pay is pretty good, but for the amount of work, it's a pretty rough way to make a buck. But there might be some other benefits here too. He had quite an influential position on the selective service draft board, and well, I had applied for an agricultural deferment I'd received it for the calendar year of 1969, so I was good for that 12-month period. But Vietnam was heating up, and I said, well, I can't count on getting these deferments permanently, but hey, if I could keep Mr. Ling happy, that might go a long ways to keep me out of service. So for the next 8 years, I dug graves, and I got a 50% pay boost 2 or 3 years later, so that brightened prospects a little bit. And but at any rate, after 8 years and about 90 graves, a growing family, and I just purchased half of the old sweet Vanderveer farm on Shellstone Road. Became the neighbors to the Rolsons. To this grave digging, I got too many irons in the fire. I gotta cut back a little bit. I got an old house I had to fix up, so that was the end of that for quite a long time. Until actually 1999. My Uncle Earl had gone to proved to be his last spring annual board meeting for the cemetery. And he figured it was going to be the last one for him. And he approached me and see if I would serve in his place on the board. And I said, sure, I'll do that. So, well, the following winter he passed away, so spring of the year 2000, I was at the annual board meeting, pre-approved, already voted in. And at the time, old Mr. DeForest was our president. And, well, he passed away a few years after that. And then the Vice President Vernon O'Brien, Vernon was a fellow a little bit younger than me, but he had quite a prosperous and thriving body shop in Amsterdam. And that was his livelihood. And as president, well, it just so happened, we had a wet spring come along, and the lawn didn't get mowed in a timely fashion, especially for Memorial Day. And boy, we had a lot of disgruntled customers, and they go down to Vernon O'Brien's place of business and ream him out. He said, I can't have this anymore. I'm quitting as president. He told me, your turn, Gordon. I said, okay. Those people come and see me at my place of business. They're not going to hurt my livelihood. And so I became president. And unfortunately, Vernon passed away a few years after that, 2019. And that happened to be the same year that our superintendent passed away too, John Turner. So, and John had never, he never groomed a replacement for his position, and so I took over his job. And then, it was this past spring, our secretary and treasurer, Judy Nesnick, she had a stroke, and, well, thank God she wasn't debilitated by it, but she felt she was no longer able to fulfill her responsibilities, so she quit. So I didn't know what we were going to do for a replacement. There's no pay involved, and quite a bit of responsibility and work, so I was lamenting one day about we need somebody to take over. My granddaughter-in-law, Devon, she said, well, I'll do that for you. I said, well, I think you'll be hired. And Well, we voted her in, there was another Schaufelberg involved right there. My Uncle Earl, my grandfather started as superintendent in 1922, and he did it until 1934, when he died in 1934, and at which point my Uncle Earl took his place. And Uncle Earl served in that capacity for 65 years, from 1999. So yeah, our family's been quite involved with the cemetery. And going forward, well, I'd like to find two people that someday will be willing to serve as president and as superintendent. Right now, I'm doing both, but that's not a good permanent arrangement. And I've got my granddaughter-in-law as secretary and treasurer. I got plans for my grandson too. So yeah, there's been 102 years of uninterrupted family involvement with the cemetery, and quite a few of those years there was more than one family member involved too. So that said, I mean, it was only natural that, that being the cemetery got carved out of our farm. I mean, got so many family members buried there. I mean, how can we not be involved? So, yeah, but I've always felt a bit indebted to the cemetery because, I'll tell you, in 1958, the New Scotland Marcy power line was planned, and the proposed route would have been kitty cornered through our farm, crossing Route 30 between the farm buildings and the tenant house, which incidentally is on the corner of Cemetery Road and 30. That's where my grandson and his wife and their new baby boy currently live. But it would have crossed between there and the farm buildings and the main farmhouse. That would have been bad enough, but in 1971, a second and much larger line came through right parallel to the old one. And that one it's never carried the amount of electricity that's capable of doing, but it's scheduled to, I guess, be turned up to full blast at some point in the not too distant future. So that would basically, as close as it is to the two houses on the farm, they'd be pretty much unlivable. And it would, due to health concerns, as well as it would scar and defile a fairly valuable piece of real estate. But anyway, it would have gone that route. But if it wasn't for our neighbor Walter Wilkie, who owned a 277-acre farm bordering our farm on the west side, this farm also was home to a rather large and productive apple orchard. Mr. Wilkie was oldest brother to two younger brothers who habitually deferred to him, as he was allegedly the brains of the operation. He'd been to college and all, and even had a job under the Roosevelt administration in the Department of Agriculture. The Wilkie family was a bit of an anomaly in our neighborhood, being Democrats, of all things. But that served us well because he apparently understood how to operate the levers of power in government. And he got the power company to agree to bypass his orchard. So that involved turning the line slightly to the west. where it broke upon the east Minaville's eastern horizon, a mile and a half off in the distance, coming over Empey Hill. So far, so good, but now Chuctanunda Cemetery was in the crosshairs, and that would never do for a power line to go through or over a cemetery. So it had to get turned another few degrees to the west to miss the cemetery. Thank God that new route nearly totally missed our farm, with only the wires passing over the very southern corner of it. I hate to think what might have been had it not been for Mr. Wilkie. And incidentally, in the year 2001, our son Brennan purchased that old Wilkie farm from his former father-in-law, Jerry Mattis, whose mother bought it for him and his brother in 1969. And so now it's a beautiful extension of Chuctanunda Farm. So that's our story.
So I am wrapping up. There we go. Thank you, Matthew.
You're welcome. Thank you for all you do, Mark.
Okay, so on the table are references for you to look at regarding the gravestones, my clothing style, my little ancestry, and photographs, and more of the synopsis. And then, last but not least, please relieve me of 50 pounds of deed books. Have to haul them back to Duanesburg. $20 each supports the cemetery. Do not think that I am twisting your arm, but I'm bringing your arm back behind your back. But it's up to you. But it's a wonderful read. So thank you for listening. Thank you for coming out tonight. I guess you weren't interested in the Democratic National Convention on TV, is there? Great. There's always plenty of reruns of that if you're interested. Ad nauseum. And that's it, folks.